Serious, people of Reddit, what is the one thing that was so disturbing and gruesome you saw in your life that still disturbs you deeply to this day? While I was stretching at a high school cross-country running race, a guy jumped his bike off the path to take a shortcut down a small hill. His front wheel hit a rock and he was ejected off the bike. He landed on his face and skidded a couple meters along the asphalt, stopping almost directly in front of me. He was motionless for a period and I was too much in shock to help. I wouldn't have known what to do anyway. Someone turned him over and his face was completely gone. I remember hearing that he lost his nose and one eye. What stuck with me was how one's life can change in an instant and the potential gruesome consequences of a single poor decision or miscalculation. I saw a video shared on a forensic pathologist's Instagram a while back of a man after a motorcycle accident without a helmet, was ejected during accident and caught the pavement with his face. The video shows the aftermath of him walking around in shock with his face flesh hanging off and his skull and eyes exposed. Haunting. OMG. I thought there was no way it could have been real. It was. Hear a neighbor screaming for help. Go outside like the frick my neighbor's doing now. She's hysterical and I run over and see what's happening. She's nonsensical and leads me to the basement all the while making this fricking wailing wheezing sound. Her son lay blue-faced on the ground. Paramedics arrived shortly and tried to resuscitate him because his feet were warm to the touch and it would have been fairly recently he had killed himself. He did not make it. Neighbor had found her son in the basement hanging from the recently deceased family dog's leash. She tried to lift him in a futile effort as if he was going to pull himself up or start breathing again. After she tried to do this and realized that she needed to cut him down, she grabbed a knife and cut him down. As she cut him down, she couldn't brace his dead weight and he smashed his head on the way down and she was very concerned by this. It wasn't the young man's face or circumstances of the death, it was that freaking noise that woman made going down the stairs. Still hear that crap sometimes. There's no sound as bad as that scream. I'll never get it out of my memory. Hope you're okay. At roughly the age of 21, one of my friends endured his mother shooting his philandering father in the head with a shotgun in their kitchen. Literally blew his head off. Once the cops were done with the investigation, my friend and his sister, 16, were effectively on their own with their father dead and their mother in jail. Within a few days of the murder, he called me and one other friend and asked us if we could go and clean up their house. They hadn't been in it since the murder and there was no way they could be the ones to clean it up. My friend and I agreed because that's what friends are for. We arrived with cleaning materials and lots of rubber gloves. What we found was a nightmare with dried blood, bone, skin, brain and everything else blasted all throughout the kitchen. She used buckshot which had lots of pellets that went everywhere. Brain matter was in the ceiling. We saw that some of the cabinets had holes in them and upon opening them we saw that the pellets carried blood, bone and brain into the various items that were in the cabinets. Crackers had blood on them. Peanut butter had bones. The ceiling was the hardest as so much of the brain went into the ceiling and we had to try to clean it over our heads. We cleaned and scrubbed that kitchen for hours and went through gallons of bleach and bloody water. At one point we thought we were mostly done, but we saw some holes in the kitchen wall and went into the living room to see that some pellets had gone through and carried blood and brains into a couch. After pulling the couch all the way from the wall, we saw more cleaning needed in that room. The whole process took us maybe 8 hours and I don't think we spoke more than a few sentences to each other while cleaning up their house. It's been 30+ years since I did this, but I know I'll never forget what I saw there. For your information, the wife was deemed temporarily insane and never spent any time in prison. Kudos for being an amazing friend. The silhouetted outline of body parts and pieces of metal and plastic strewn over the road when a family friend was hit head on and killed while driving a motorcycle. I attended a motorcycle versus lorry RTA which was a similar circumstance. Wasn't pleasant. Weirdly, despite being as horrific as it was, it never haunted me. It makes me feel sad but no flashbacks. Seeing someone hanging from a tree though, yeah, that one stuck with me and will never go away. I have paralysis dreams and sometimes I see them again swinging in my doorway. Really chokes me up. I saw someone's leg degloved. It was fricked. I was walking to school and someone bailed on their motorbike without proper protection on the road I walked to school in. Just seeing the word degloved is enough to give me a physical reaction. Watched my stepdad try to kill himself by hanging himself off the fire escape at our apartment. He told me to tell your mom I said goodnight and he jumped off. When my parents were divorcing, my dad waited until everyone was out, then set fire to our house and cut his wrists. He didn't die, but I remember going back into the deserted house weeks later to get some stuff and seeing all the blood on my parents' bed and sprays of it everywhere. Old blood looks almost black. I was only 12. When I was 15, my 13 years old best friend shot himself in the head. I was the first person to find him. Still have nightmares and I'm 30 now. Jesus. At 13. I'm so sorry. I used to copy file notes for inmates and deliver them to the prison when their cases were updated. I had to go through folders for each inmate, often seeing letters from victims, family members begging for their release, and reasons why they were incarcerated. The really bad ones were flagged with sensitive material labels, like the aftermath of abuse photos and worse. Was carrying a particularly large stack of these folders to a parole officer's desk one day. They got away from me and started to shift when I dropped them. One of them spilled photos of child pornography, and I saw way too much of them. It turned my stomach so badly, I had to leave that job. Mad props to people who work to stop children from being abused. I know for a fact I couldn't do it. I completely understand your reaction. When I was about 10 or 11, my older sister jumped out of our moving van trying to kill herself while my mom was driving. We were going about 55 and she hit the ground and the back tire ran over her. She somehow survived and has a normal life with her husband now. I don't really talk to her about it that much, but it was an awful experience. I'm so sorry. That must be a traumatic thing to go through. I came home to find my fiancé dead on the living room floor. Had to end up selling the house because every time I came home that's what I saw. 10 years of happy memories wiped out by one awful one. I wasn't allowed to see him. He died face down and had apparently been there for a couple of hours, so the blood pooled at the lowest points of the body. I was upset at the time, but now realize that I wouldn't want that to be in my brain. Sucks so bad. I went through something similar. I moved out of our house within weeks of my wife dying. She died in our bed. I never slept in it again. Everywhere you look, just memories and shadows of what should have been. Life is really fricked sometimes. Saw a jogger get hit by a car when I was driving with my aunt. She pulled over and ran to help and call 911, and she came back to the car covered in blood. I was like 7. I was on the streets after fleeing violence at my family's house. I was in my car behind a Hobby Lobby and I was awoken by C-Ked trying to break my driver's side window with their head. They kept smashing their head even once blood was splattering on the window. I fumbled trying to find my keys from the panic and gunned it out of there. I went to a nearby McDonald's and asked for a couple cups of water to rinse off my window and door. I probably looked like a serial killer, lol. OMG, sounds like a zombie out for blood. Warning. Long post. TL. DR. Bad 911 medical call with poor outcome. Well, here goes. I'm a paramedic in southern rural US. When I was new into the field, we were dispatched to a call for shortness of breath for an elderly woman. We arrived on scene to find a gaggle of family members and several local PD. The medic I was working with at the time was helping me learn and mentoring me through paramedic school. He told me, "This is your call. I'll do whatever you need me to, but this is all you." We enter the residence to find grandma laid out on the couch in obvious distress. We move family out of the way and I say, "Hello ma'am, my name is Musarut. Are you having trouble breathing?" She gives me this look of absolute fear. That same look you've seen in pictures of people moments before death. Lo and behold, 3-8 seconds later goes unresponsive. We emergency move her to the stretcher, get to the ambulance and begin intubation. A sheriff on scene agrees to drive us to the hospital. Little did we know he was a family member. I tear her clothes off and begin CPR. The driver, sheriff, throws us across the cabin at every turn in his panic. Lose our intubation tools with every curve in the road. Set up. 1 or 2 compressions get thrown across the cab. Rinse and repeat. We arrive at the air. She has a N title of 5, which means all the drugs and CPR we did isn't worthwhile because she's very dead. This didn't bug me initially. Breaking ribs during CPR. Drilling into her bone for fluids, drugs. Old lady titties didn't bug me. but sometimes I still see that look on her face in her last seconds of life. That primal fear of impending doom. She went into cardiac arrest in the best possible scenario, witnessed by 2 healthcare providers, and still died. When it's your time, I guess. This was my first honest run-in with stress that stayed with me in my career. There has been several other incidents of varying degree, but this poor woman's agony and desperation was my great introduction to my lifelong friend PTSD. A funny note, when we returned to the station, medic asked me what did you say to her, to which I replied, "Ma'am, are you having trouble breathing yet?" Last thoughts in her head before she died was, what a stupid freaking question. Thanks a lot for doing that job. I'm sorry you're struggling with PTSD now. My first trip to Mexico. Saw a guy walking on the side of the road during a storm, was struck by lightning, and my grandpa put him in the bed of the truck to take him to the hospital, but the poor fellow fell dead instantly. I remember I kept looking back and saw and smelled charred flesh. I was only 4 years old. 24 years later, that image still haunts me to this day. Can I just ask, what did you guys do after you realized he's dead? Watched a shotgun suicide in 2nd grade. Guy had a domestic dispute with his wife and the cops had him blocked in front of our house. Keep in mind, this was in the late 80s before tasers and crap. Anyway, dude jumped out of the car and hit himself in the chest with a claw hammer, thinking that would do the trick. When he realized it wouldn't, he reached into the back seat and grabbed a shotgun, stuck it in his mouth, and suddenly his head was gone. Nightmares even to this day. I was driving to work one morning and there was a car parked on the side of a bridge, which is odd, so it made me look. I figured somebody broke down. As I drove by, I saw a man who had climbed over the rails and was leaning off. We made direct eye contact as I drove by. It took me a second to realize what I had seen. I turned around as fast as I could, but he had already jumped. I pulled over and ran to the side of the bridge, and I could see his body all the way down at the bottom. About a 200-foot drop. I ran down to the end of the bridge and then ran down the hill to the bottom. When I got down there, it was so eerie. I walked over to him and knelt down and checked his pulse. When I picked up his hand, it was like picking up a warm bag of marbles. All the bones had broken. That was probably 20 years ago, but I can still remember how odd it was to be alone down there next to a broken body that used to be somebody. When the police came, I had to wait in the police car to give my report of what I saw. The man's wife showed up at the bridge and was told of the news right in front of me. I had the unfortunate front row seat to see her break down and die inside. I can still remember the look on his face, and the look on hers. Once when I was driving to school, I almost got hit by a drunk driver. They were speeding and lost control, bumped into a semi and flew straight towards my car. I slammed on the brakes and they flew into a steel pole. I watched her head slam into the wheel and then fly back when the airbag went off. I went to help her out of her car, and seeing her bruised and bloody upper body was shocking. It made me realize that no matter how many precautions I take, there is always something that's out of my control. Reasons like this is why people shouldn't DUI. Used to work in journalism. 2 bad car wrecks come to mind. One was a head-on highway crash involving a van with 8 people in it. They were all trapped when the van caught fire and burned to death. Got there as the bodies were being removed. Didn't see much but the smell. Second was a motorcycle crash. Motorcyclist took a sharp curve at 50 miles per hour and ended up impaled in a chain link fence. My friend heard from his roommate that he thought their apartment was getting robbed. I go over there with him and the front door is ajar. We try to open it, but the door is obstructed by something. So we retreat to the stairwell. Someone comes banging on the door to the stairs. We think it's the intruder. It's not. It's the roommate. Their third roommate was the one obstructing the door. He had wrestled with the burglars and was shot in the head. That fricked me up for a while. I still get PTSD flashbacks when I hear a scream. I think someone's invading my home. Went to my friend's house after the cameras were covered and the door was ajar. It had been burgled but no one was inside. It was so eerie. Frick ajar doors. A toddler getting hit by a car. The little girl took off across the yard headed towards the street and the mom was too far away to catch her before she ran right in front of the car that was in front of us. My dad slammed on the brakes as soon as he saw her running and was screaming no 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 no, but the car in front of us didn't see her. My dad pulled into the driveway across the street from the house and told us not to look out the back window. We could hear the horrific screams from the mom and the driver was absolutely hysterical. We had to stay there until the police arrived and it was just constant screaming. It is never talked about unless one of us, my dad and brothers, have a nightmare about it. I seemed to block it out for years until I became a parent when it started becoming a reoccurring nightmare for the entire pregnancy. People have written about the screams when a parent realizes that their child has passed. I have chills just thinking about it. I don't know how I would survive such a loss. I'm sorry you had to hear that. I can understand why that awful memory has stuck with you. Walked in on the nurses getting my dad ready to go down to the morgue when I was 17. I wanted to just spend a few more minutes with him but instead saw my naked, dead dad getting all his tubes yanked. It's been over 20 years and I can see the macabre humor in it, but still. Not nearly as gruesome as some of these, but watching my best friend be taken by brain cancer. Over the course of 15 months he lost 100 pounds and turned into a yellowed husk of the healthy 23-year-old he was before. It was a grueling process. Almost home, after a long work trip, came up on a gruesome 3-car wreck on a 2-lane highway. I saw a state trooper covering the body of a 5-year-old. This was about 10 years ago. Watched my brother crack his head open on his wedding night. Somehow fell out of the golf cart and landed on his face. It was just me and the driver on this dark road. I jumped out and ran to him, unconscious and seizing, blood everywhere. Took forever for the ambulance to show up. Luckily he regained consciousness and tried to sit up, so in my panicked state after watching him land on his head neck, I spent the entire time holding his neck stiff just in case he broke it. Head wounds bleed like crazy, apparently. My mom was a cop at Put in Bay for a while, and told me a story about some drunk guy who had this exact same thing happen to him except the dude who fell off died on impact. Your brother is extremely lucky. I've got 2 and they are both from elementary school. The first happened when the cool trend was to shake up a popcorn and pierce the lid with a pin then shotgun the coke. One kid went to do it and lost his grip on the pin which was blasted down his throat by the force of the pop flying out of the can. I remember being amazed by how much blood was pouring out of this kid's mouth. He went to hospital and recovered. The scene shows up in my stress dreams sometimes. The second was the next year, so I'm in grade 4. The schoolyard was surrounded by a chain link fence, maybe 5 feet tall, but being the 80s there was no caps on the points at the top. So a frisbee or ball or something got tossed over the fence and an older kid decided he was going to climb the fence to get it. Got to the top and his foot slipped and the fence went through under his eye and popped his eyeball out. Just a shocked kid standing there staring at his own eye still on the fence. No idea what happened to him since he was a few years older, and being a kid I never thought to follow up on it. Go to imagine he lost the eye at the very least. Still get the heebie-jeebies 20 plus years later when I think of that one. Story 1 is unfortunate. Story 2 is fucked up. Eye injuries are something that scare the crap out of me. I want to unread that. Edit. Fixed an error. Story 2 and Story 2. Yeah, I know. And whoa. This is my most upvoted comment ever. Eye-opening. My friend at work falling out of a 30-foot tower, landed head first, and died in my arms. I was covered in his blood and had a massive mental breakdown after that. Second would be the sight of my own fingers after being degloved at the same factory. Nothing but bone left on my ring and middle fingers up to the first knuckle. This factory sounds wildly unsafe. I'm a funeral director and I've got 2 cases I think about a lot. The first was a Russian man who shot himself. He entered the yard in a poncho, sat on a chair and shot himself in the heart. Russians always do open caskets, so he was preserving his face, but he didn't realize I need an intact heart to embalm. But that's not what sticks with me. When we unwrapped him he had a big fat smile plastered on his face. It was like staring into the void and the void smiling calmly back at you. He was completely at ease with his decision. The second is who I affectionately refer to as Riverman. He had been there for 2 weeks. The smell was indescribable. He was falling apart. Blue, green and black. You can't just convince yourself everything's fine. There's this innate biological response to working with decay like that, and all day my body was in fight or flight mode. His wife insisted on viewing him. We cautioned her. We showed her photos. We asked the medical examiner to caution her, but she could not be dissuaded. She spent 15 freaking minutes in a tiny room alone with him. When I lived back home, public executions was still a thing. I am unsure if it's still a thing now. My family, being normal people who would not like to see other people die, would always make sure to avoid those areas like the plague when this crap was going down. Unfortunately, one day after an all-nighter at work, I forgot what was happening due to the sheer tiredness and caught a glimpse of it. What made absolutely horrific was the number of people there to watch it. It was so sad to see a crowd so big there at 6 AM on a snowing morning just to watch someone hang from a crane and die. When my ex, long distance, girlfriend cut her own neck on video call with me watching with a razor blade, there was nothing I could do but watch and beg her to stop. She had a bad case of schizophrenia, so it was really bad. Dang, something like that happened to me. My best friend found out that his mom died, so he video called me and just cut his wrist sideways many times and bled out. Rip to your ex. My stepmom murdered my father in front of me on Christmas, with a .22 to the back of his head. I miss him every day, and it's been 19 years this December. While it did happen a while ago, I still struggle with the imagery in my head. But I think you'll deserve the story from my perspective. The story. It's the 21st of December, 2001. I was 5 years old and I had just had a very vivid nightmare about a toy attacking me on Christmas. I woke up crying and went to go lay down with my dad, as any small child does when they are scared. My dad was sleeping in the living room, as him and my stepmom had been arguing, and he was in the doghouse. I walked into the living room, and by the light of the Christmas tree, I saw her, gun in hand, standing over my dad's sleeping body. Shoot the gun. Without noticing me, she puts the gun down, opens the front door and goes into the front room to call the police with some bull's story about a break-in. I'm shocked in one place. I can't stop staring at my dad, who obviously no longer looked like my dad. She saw me, grabbed the gun, grabbed me and grabbed my sibling from the other room and carried us to the back room of the house. She placed us in the Marshall bed and placed one finger in her lips and went shhhhhhhh as she placed the gun under the foot of the bed, and then she ran out to greet the police who had just arrived. Small town. They got there fast. She claimed first it was a thief that had broken in, but when pressed further she claimed the gun accidentally went off when she went to confront my dad about their marriage problems. I have issues with that statement, as on that night, she had planned for her own children, from a previous relationship, to not be in the house, only me and my sibling who were my dad's kids. She was incredibly mean and rude to us constantly, and she would be incredibly hurtful when my dad wasn't around. My dad was not abusive. He was an amazing father, medically retired from the military, cried when his grandma died, and on 9/11, my dad was a very hard-working man that loved us so much. He did everything he could every day to make us happy. I only have wonderful memories of him. As I remember it, she premeditated the murder, and when I wrote her in prison 15 years later for some closure, she only wrote back that she didn't care for me or my siblings. Never did. Only her children, who don't even know she exists now. I remember the police coming and putting blankets over our heads to get us out of the house without having to re-witness the scene. I was shocked into silence and didn't talk for a while. TLDR. Vivid memory of my stepmom purposefully shooting my dad in his head while he slept. I am so sorry for your loss. I can't imagine how awful that would be. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.